The value of your unit is directly tied to the condition of that building. Take one glance and you look at the floor tiles, and they're old school floor tiles.
You can date stamp that property.
Whoever does the remodel really is going to make more money, you know.
Hey everyone, so today we're chatting with one of my favorite girl boss realtors who's developed this laser sharp method for creating and calculating the proper investment for almost any property. It's like a love it or leave it method that she's really perfected. And she's also an influencer that you absolutely definitely want to follow. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So Dyani, you've developed this razor sharp method for calculating the appropriate property investment in almost any piece of real estate. It's amazing. So whether it's new construction or it might be a legacy property that someone might be considering a renovation for, you've got this way of calculating what the appropriate all investment is. Tell us about how you do this.
Originally, I had started a nonprofit organization in Nicaragua when I was in my 20s.
Okay.
And that was actually my big adventure abroad. And it was in 2008, so quite a while ago. And just from the very beginning, I built the whole thing myself. And it still exists today. So I built a sustainable organization that is now run and led by the locals of the community.
Love that.
Of course, some of the things I had to learn basically was everything. And, on this shoestring budget, how to fundraise, how to, distribute the funds, exactly how to plan for several years financially, year after year, and what our needs were in the organization. We had a pretty big staff, big operation, and eventually we scaled it internationally. And that's how I wound up here in Puerto Vallarta. And at one point we had, about 5 different schools that were running. It was an education program. So, there was a lot going on. And of course, the finances, especially in a nonprofit organization, they're pretty complex. So I really had to develop a lot of methods. And I also wore a lot of hats since I was the founder. So I was on the board as well.
Right.
I was on the finance committee, and I found that I was pretty much running and leading the finance committee. One of the things I wound up loving the most was, Google Sheets. And so I developed a lot of, formulas, but a lot of it was projections, estimates, numbers coming in from all different ways, all of that. So it was something that I'd already done for a really long time, and something that for, literally over a decade. And so it's something that comes very naturally to me. And I also worked with a lot of investors because, one of the biggest ways that I was able to run funds to fund my organization was with philanthropists.
Sure.
So, learning a lot about how investors think and work and everything that they do. I was very inspired at a young age by the impact that really people were able to make, and the mentality and perspective of people who really leverage their money. There's just a lot of really critical thinking, creative thinking, smart thinking, and really developing these relationships with investors and philanthropists. Gave me that perspective when I transitioned to the real estate industry, that I really wanted to be involved in the investment component of real estate. I kind of developed all these methods to be able to calculate and present those numbers. And because I was used to always presenting financials at board meetings, whether it was the accounting for the year, even auditing the accountant to do all the calculations, or projecting, what our financial strategy was going to be for, 1, 3, 5 years, and putting them in charts and presenting them. So this is a service that I was able to develop and provide for investors as well. So that's something that's kind of how I put it all together.
That's amazing. How did you develop this method, and what was the background that gave you the skills to all of this work that you just described?
So one of the first things I did when I realized, I really want to work with investors, when I transitioned to the real estate industry, from the nonprofit. So I exited my organization. I became a mom, and I decided, I wanted to do a different kind of business. And that's when I got into real estate. And, as I started developing content, my real estate brand developed, and it evolved from Dyanimite lifestyle and real estate to Dyanimite investment realty.
Right.
And I was like, I need to learn a little bit more about real estate investing before I, go talking about it. And, I loved studying the numbers already. I was in Flex looking at the data, looking at returns. I'd already got an Air DNA, subscriptions. I could see, what the cash flow was looking like. And then I wound up getting a certification, getting real estate investor certified with the RRC, which is a certification program. And the interesting thing, I reached out to them and I said, does this apply if you're a real estate agent in Mexico? And they said, we don't have any real estate agents in Mexico taking the course. They're like, so we'll just give it to you for free. And you can tell us how it works if it does work for you as an agent in Mexico. So that was really interesting. It was just very much like the stars were aligned. Like I was meant to take this course. It was really, really interesting and dynamic and filled with a bunch of information about working with real estate investors. It was largely focused on rental returns and property management stuff and just cash flow in that regard. And some of it was US focused, so I did have to alter it a little bit to, meet the Mexico market specifically. And then, once I started working with investors, I learned a lot more in the regards of the remodel, the resale, and the profit margin and calculating all of those rates as well. So, I just kind of combined both of them to put together this, formula and calculations and all of that I now am able to provide to clients to give them, the big picture on what the return looks like.
That is an amazing asset. So you actually got certified in a program and took the time to actually do a formalized program of study to give you more of this financial knowledge and financial literacy to help create these kind of complex calculations. Tell us about that.
It's a certification program, and I took it a couple years ago. I think it was about 30 hours or something like that. And, there was a combination of a lot of different courses, and they provided a lot of tools, for making calculations, for calculating returns on properties, and, even just essentials for property management and project management. And there was a lot of different resources that were available in this course. And it was just really informative.
Super
and
detailed.
Yeah. And I did give them that feedback when it was done, just so it is useful for, for agents in Mexico. I also do listen to a lot of Bigger Pockets and, podcasts and information from investors.
Super faves.
you listen to
great follows and shares. Yeah.
I love Bigger Pockets. I just love hearing people's stories. Some of them are just very inspiring and just, it's really interesting to think of all the different combinations of things that people put together. So, some of it is the self-educated, but the course itself was really a great certification.
Real much.
Yeah.
So in addition, compounding onto that actual financial certification, you also did some affiliations here with real estate agencies and associations in Mexico. Is that right?
Yeah. What's really interesting is recently, so I had joined, of course, when you become a real estate agent here, it's, really recommended that you join AMPI, which is like the association that regulates the real estate industry. And, it's like the version of NAR for Mexico. And I became a AMPI member in Puerto Vallarta, and there's actually 3 sections. And then I switched to Compostela and I switched agencies, and then I wound up in Nayarit. And so I've been part of all the different AMPIs.
All 3 affiliations. Yes.
Every year I was switching, from one chapter to another. But, the AMPI Nayarit section is in this really formative stage of growth. And they're really, really dedicated to a lot of their, improvement. And I'm not sure, I wasn't as involved in the other ones, but I started teaching courses for realtors as well. And so I wound up doing this partnership partnership with AMPI so I could provide continuing education hours for my courses to realtors.
Yeah.
And then as I got in and got involved and connected with AMPI members, I started to see, some of the needs for support that as an association they have. And as you know, I've been in the nonprofit industry for a really long time on boards of directors and committees. So it was like
natural segue.
it was a natural, it was a very
to help
natural
them.
segue. Exactly. I volunteered to be on a couple committees, and one was the social responsibility committee for,
Awesome.
because I still, want to be able to contribute to the community. And then they had seen that I do a lot of marketing, digital marketing and communications. And, they were like, well, maybe you want to join the marketing committee too. And maybe you want to help us with our website. So, I have been helping AMPI with a lot of different things, and also just working collaboratively with a lot of other people who are helping AMPI. And I just love the sense of community, and it just makes me feel like at home to be, in this thing where people are working as a community, working together instead of, just divisively or separately as in competitively as agents. It's just nice that we help each other and that we, work to make the real estate industry in Puerto Vallarta better overall.
Yeah.
And I love that about AMPI.
So you're really transferring, it's a skill transfer from the nonprofit or NGO world into, a highly competitive marketplace and subset of realtors here, helping them train them on education, train them on marketing and sales techniques, social media literacy, and furthering their brand in that respect. And bringing a community together that sometimes works separately or works adversarially or apart on different aisles or different sides of the table, bringing a deal together.
Yeah.
So that's an amazing crossover of your nonprofit experience into the entrepreneurial world.
Exactly. And empowerment, that's another one of my things. So I was really empowering agents to, take control of their brand and their identity online. And, and so it is interesting because I know the spirit of competition, like technically we're in competition and I'm also, in real estate sales, but I found that, it actually has just helped the growth of my business, my reputation, my authority in the community, and my connection with other people in general, right? Because we're all humans connecting and working together. And that helps me leverage sales, have good relationships with people. And also I've started building a team and recruiting agents. So,
Wow.
So
really full service.
it's full service. And that helps me grow my business to reach more people, and helps the agents also in finding a broker that's going to, it's going to provide them with the kind of training in digital marketing and other skills in building their own brand, and something that's more empowerment driven than necessarily like, the brick and mortar style real estate and just real estate brokerage.
Yeah, I love that story. So one of the really interesting parts of your story is that you actually made the move to Mexico with your family. So, with your husband and young kids, 9 years ago, you made the move to Mexico. What's the most interesting or impactful, way that's actually affected or changed your family's lifestyle and their dynamic?
So the interesting thing is that I actually moved to Mexico before I had a family, by myself, and I was growing my nonprofit organization.
So cool.
And just as a random donor whose wife was from Puerto Vallarta kind of, suggested that we expand it to Puerto Vallarta. And similar to you, I didn't really know anything about Puerto Vallarta. I was
Wow.
just like, okay, sure.
let's
Yeah,
go.
well, I don't know. No research, no idea. I came here and it was exactly what I had imagined. I was like, I lived in Nicaragua, and it was a small town without access to many resources. And, the US also felt like, but I loved the community connection and the warmth and, the Latin culture and just like the life I built there. But I started to outgrow it, and I wanted more, I just wanted to like go to the mall, and like I wanted more anonymity, not just to be in a tiny town. And I did want more infrastructure. Like I don't like it when the electricity goes out every 3 days, but I didn't want the, overdevelopment of the United States necessarily. And, the kind of individualistic culture that I was perceiving was going, that it was like over there. I just didn't feel like it was necessarily where I wanted to go. and wound up here. And I was like, this is the
This is
perfect
it.
middle ground.
It's
Like,
the perfect, yeah, perfect
yeah.
medium. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then my husband shortly, we were dating at the time, kind of followed me here and joined me in our life here. He's a merchant marine, so he can work from, wherever. Really, he just goes works on the boat and lives on the boat and then comes home wherever home is.
Perfect.
So, he had that flexibility. And so this is where we built our family. And, that I actually got pregnant shortly after, I came here. So my son is going to turn 8. So, we've been here for 9 years. He's going to turn 8. So, I've been pretty much a mom the whole time. And my daughter's 6. So just raising my kids here has been amazing. And, I couldn't imagine raising them anywhere else. I really couldn't. I think it's just, yeah, it's a great place to grow up. And it's been, just wonderful for our family.
That's an incredible story, and probably so relatable as you move into consulting and working with investors, buying, real estate in Mexico, helping to navigate the transactions and understand the nuances of, investors and families spending more time here around the portfolios of property that they're creating. You have, the perfect relatable story about making that, cultural transition, and in creating a new home here. Okay, so breaking down the deal using this really proprietary method that you've created for assessing the value of almost any transaction. Let's dive in and talk about sort of the top line analysis, or the key numbers that you sort of look at and figure out what makes a real estate transaction worth investing in.
Yeah, I actually have this listing right now at Bayview Grand.
Okay,
And
great example.
yeah, it's a really great listing. And the interesting thing about it is it's a little bit of a fixer-upper, which is another great example. Like, you either buy pre-construction or you buy a remodel if you want to get the highest return
Right.
on your, initial investment.
Yes.
And it was also an inherited property. So the seller, would honestly, he would probably let it go right now for a pretty low price, just to not have to do the remodel. Likely we will do some of the remodeling prior to listing.
Okay.
But I'll do a little bit of a breakdown based on if we weren't going to do all the remodeling, and if any potential buyer were to purchase it right now at a price that my seller would likely accept, which is below market value,
That's
and
right.
and the other great thing about this property is it's beachfront in the marina. So
Checks all the
it
boxes.
checks all the boxes,
Great.
and it's a 3-bedroom. So, the more bedrooms, the better, just for
Yes.
getting your return, especially with vacation rentals. And so, I think even a 3-bedroom can fall into the more luxury market. And yeah, so it's a really great property with amazing potential, and literally in probably the best location within Bayview Graham. So Bayview Graham has a pool and all of these elements, and
Very high touch amenities,
high touch amenities.
sort of a resort amenity package.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I always talk about when it comes to like renovating condos specifically is it can be a little bit tricky because, well, and this is also a risk that comes when you buy pre-construction, because you just don't know how they're going to keep up the whole building, and your unit, the value of your unit is directly tied to the condition of that building. And one good thing about Bayview Grand is it's 20 years old and they are still keeping it up it has a great reputation as a great place to stay,
Solid.
and some units are in better conditions than others, but you can actually look through and see, even to the active listings and other things like that, which units have been remodeled and which haven't. And because the infrastructure is solid, I mean, we're talking old school Vallarta, built to last, sustain any kind of, weather, anything, with cement, concrete walls.
Block construction.
Yeah, like
old school, thick
school.
walls.
Exactly. Right. And so that is some really great bones to work with when you're doing a remodel. Yeah. Yeah, so then that's going to give you it's great ingredients to really get a pretty high return.
Yeah. So as a seller of a resale property, there are really two paths to take. There's the sell it as is in as is condition and look for a motivated buyer who has the tolerance and the threshold to do a renovation.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the repair, maybe the inspection, points that came up during the due diligence, and or maybe upgrade some of the things that are super out of date and reposition it a bit as a more contemporary, more market ready property.
Yeah.
Are those the sort of two paths that you would look at for a reseller?
For a seller. Yeah, yeah. And I think it's interesting because from a buyer perspective, obviously if you buy, nobody wants to do the full remodel, but if you buy it at the lower price and actually do the remodel yourself, and you have people like yourself who can facilitate that, you're going to pay less closing costs, you're going to get a higher return, and it's the same for the seller. Whoever does the remodel really is going to make more money, because the seller, they're going to have to let it go at probably a lower price than they really want to, or than it's really worth, just because of the person that's assuming all of the risk in the remodel itself, the unknown factors, the time,
investment,
the investment,
market,
everything. And some people really don't want to deal with it. So that, that's part of the package, right? But again, you can always have a service like what Create Interiors offers, right? And be able to just, outsource that renovation and still make good money on the transaction itself. So, I would definitely advise my seller to do the renovations.
Yes.
And, and I would help him facilitate those if that's the path that they decide to take. But if there is a buyer that's interested, they could probably just, he'd probably let it go right now, because it's also inherited property, so
sure.
Without having to get into the renovations. But I do think when it comes to the inspection and the resistance and all of that stuff, it's just it's a harder sell, so you have to really find the right kind of people that, investors that are really able to see that potential.
So then let's frame it up from a buyer's perspective. There are two paths as well, at least for a buyer to consider. They could buy something that's already market ready, that has been renovated, and it's going to go on market for nightly rental rate and earning potential within the shortest possible time frame. And then there's the unrenovated property that needs the work and, is below sort of market standard for that property or that area, where the investment in renovation and upgrades is really necessary. So those are those the two paths?
Those are pretty much, and then there's pre-construction. Let's say, you are ready for a rental. It's a cash flowing, high rental income property, and you buy it turnkey, ready to go, fully furnished, and it's going to start making you money tomorrow. The time is money. Do your thing. It will definitely appreciate still over time, right?
Sure.
But I think if it doesn't meet that criteria, I would just, pause it and make it a cash flowing property, make the necessary investments and try to get it.
So let's say your buyer is motivated to see the highest return on that investment and going through with a renovation. What are the categories of things that you typically look at or try to cost out and highly recommend to that investor to boost property values in the shortest amount of time?
So one of the biggest things is going to be, definitely the floor tiles, especially when you're looking at an older property. That ages the property immediately. You take one glance and you look at the floor tiles, and they're old school floor tiles.
You can date stamp that property by
the floor tiles.
Type of floor tile.
Replace the floor tiles. And it's significant work. I mean, you have to break it. You never know what kind of things are going to happen when, you're doing the demolition of the current floor tiles, and, you have to dig up everything, and who knows
of the floor.
What's underneath, or what kind of exactly. And then there's the leveling. There's no exactly
platform, right?
It's not to be underestimated. It's a work.
Sure.
It's definitely going to take some work to do, but it's worth the investment, because immediately you've added, 10, 20 years to, or you've taken away, you've made your property and more
erased time.
You've erased time. Suddenly you're newborn. You're born again.
Exactly.
And then of course, carpentry, the kitchen, the cabinets, all the stuff that's built in, a lot of pre-constructions, a lot of condos. Most properties have built some sort of built-in, something. And if that hasn't been redone or remodeled on the property that you're purchasing, it's gotta be taken care of. Another thing that people, kind of tend to underestimate is even like the ceilings how are they looking? Ceiling fans are another big one. The lighting, the light fixtures, are they looking new and modern? Are they like LED? Is probably a better investment.
Quality,
Yeah,
functionality. They wear out over time.
Exactly.
And on beachfront property, also, you have a lot of corrosion. So there's a lot of wear and tear and humid weather conditions and so forth that would contribute hugely to ceiling fans and all lighting.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like with this property at Bayview Grand, for example, running the analysis on just doing the remodel alone, it was just up for a 240 square meter, 3-bedroom apartment.
Yeah,
would cost about $75,000 US, and that would also be fully replacing the floor tiles, all the ceilings, and the carpentry, of course, the electric, the plumbing, the AC system is not even working. So the whole central AC system needs to be reconstructed. Like it's done.
So to name off those key things, you listed flooring, cabinetry, lighting and ceiling fans, and then you went to really functional aspects like the condition of electrical, which often can be super out of date.
Oh yeah, and that's a big. That's a whole. You got to break through the walls
here.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're talking about structural elements.
Yeah.
So electrical and plumbing, and then you mentioned AC. Which is super important because when you're dealing with buildings of a certain age, you're talking about obsolete components, and you're talking about obsolete air conditioning systems where those parts or those brands are not available anymore.
And if you're in an upscale condo complex, just like Bayview Grand, for example, the systems that they're using are centralized AC. So, you can't be putting in a mini splits
ceiling.
You have to install, and that has a higher cost than, mini splits, for example.
And when we're talking about coastal, resort, ocean facing properties in coastal front real estate markets, you're talking about a high percentage of corrosion, humidity, salt air, all those things that tend to wear out those mechanisms quite quickly over time.
Oh yeah,
and need both maintenance and replacement.
Oh yeah, especially if you're oceanfront.
That's right,
because the salt just comes right in there. We actually went to visit this property the other day and walked out onto the terrace, and the ceiling fan was just broken on the floor because it had just corroded from the salt and the exposure to the elements outside. After not having been replaced for so long.
That's super relatable to owners and investors who come from colder climates in the U.S. and Canada, where we're super familiar with the salt corrosion aspect of road maintenance. So we all know what that does to our vehicles. So this is what happens to AC units, and that's in those same kind of conditions.
Yeah.
So that's the big five. So you've really identified.
Those are the big five.
The big five in terms of renovation.
They are. Yeah. Those are you cover those elements, and you have really well functioning property. Yeah.
And then you go into what I like to describe as sort of the high touch aspects. So you talked about furniture, and you broke down a really good percentage amount allocated to a furnishings package for the property value that we're talking about at this, Bay Grand listing.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect would be the high touch amenities. So the kind of quality of bedding and sheets and towels, or chefs, kitchen supplies, and quality of appliances and so forth, that are going to lead to a higher nightly rental rate because you've loaded that property with more top tier amenities.
Yeah, exactly. No, and that's where it comes into like the details. And I think even purchasing unfurnished and then furnishing strategically, and even if it's not a remodel, is still going to give you a pretty good return.
That's right.
Because an unfurnished place, it's not going to be you're going to be getting it for much cheap. It's not going to be as costly as a fully furnished luxury amenity, turnkey, ready to go vacation rental, like we were just talking about, which is actually a good investment because you can cash flow starting tomorrow. So if you are going to make that kind of investment into the property, then of course you raise the value.
Yeah,
you raise the proposition value for any investor too that would come in, especially if it's an investor market.
Yeah. So one path, if I hear you correctly, is the shortest time from key keys to cash flow. So getting the keys to the property and how quickly you can cash flow that in terms of rental income. The other path is the long-term property appreciation, which speaks to how what the floor is on the price you purchased,
Yeah.
and then the threshold or the sort of lower price of the property that you purchased, and then the spread to the cost of renovation to bring it up to market conditions.
Exactly.
So there's really two factors or two cost sheets, let's say, that you're looking at when you advise owners on how to invest.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is what I like about this property, that I'm using as an example, that, that it has both factors.
Yeah,
You
could
have,
do both things.
you have both, growth opportunities there when it comes, but it also depends on what the goals of the investor are.
Exactly. Right.
And I always ask that, at our first interview and first, consultation session, because it depends your whole strategy, your amount of your investment, are you going to be able to meet your goals?
Yeah.
And you might, that also gonna, impact what specific area you look at, what exactly kind of property you might get, and because you might buy a property, for example, that, is not going to appreciate as much because it's in a very established region, but the cash flow is very high. And really you're just looking to, retain with a slight appreciation rate the amount of your initial investment, while also cash flowing significantly on a monthly basis. Like I had some clients who were talking about, this is our retirement plan, so we really want the biggest monthly payout, the biggest cash flow payout possible, so that we can, that can contribute to our income. So, in that case, you're going to be looking at, a higher priced investment, and so you're going to want to think strategically about
That's
it.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an amazing way of looking at things that you have created. So, where can potential investors follow you and get more of your insights and learn more about this investment system that you've created?
Yeah. So I have a YouTube channel that is youtube.com/@Dyanimite. Dyanimite is my first name, Dyani Mite. So just Dyanimite, and that's Dyanimite Investment Realty. But all of my handles are Dyanimite. So, Instagram, Facebook, it's all Dyanimite, and YouTube. And my website is dyanimite.com. And, you can also Google me, Dyani Leal. One of the things I specialize in that I teach to realtors is your online presence. So mine is very easy to find.
So important. It's so findable. Yeah. This is definitely one influencer you absolutely want to follow. So rapid fire questions, the fun part.
Okay.
What did people not know about you?
One thing I don't think people know, I talk about how I know a lot about, marketing and everything because I studied communications. The communications school I went to in Boston was Emerson College, but my major is actually creative writing. So I think that's one thing that people don't know about me, that I studied, that I have a degree in creative writing specifically. And, my parents right now they're both writers or co-writing a book. My grandparents, each have a book published, just their memoirs and stuff. But it's just a very writer family.
Yes. Total insider's info. I love that.
Yeah. I'm a writer nerd, so that's
as much as you are doing visual presence and visual communication as an influencer and a content creator. You also have this profound, comfort with the ability and innate skill with writing.
Exactly. Yeah,
so
you nailed it. Yeah.
Shout out to Boston education here. Both of us coming out of that East Coast environment. Yeah. So, what do you love and hate about long-term living in Mexico?
Well, I have lived abroad for 18 years. So, I haven't lived in the United States in a really long time. And actually, this has been most of my adult life that I've lived in Latin America. So, I don't know really where my perspective is coming from, but I did live in Nicaragua for about a decade before I moved to Puerto Vallarta, where I've been for, almost 10 years as well. So it's been,
cool.
it's been an adventure. And so I love Latin America in general. I knew right away that like the US was not a good fit for me. And the second I just became an adult, I took off and I never went back. But so it is just, I love the social community, and the warmth, the human connection, and just, the organic nature of everything, it's just, you don't have to kind of overthink it. And you just, you can just, go with the flow. And of course, living on the beach, living on the coast. And I don't even go to the beach directly that much. Like, but I don't like getting dirty in the sand, really. I'm not like rolling around in
You're
the
still
sand.
enjoying
But
that
exactly.
incredible proximity to ocean, and
That's
all
what it is.
the balance and grounding that it provides.
That's what it is. Yeah, it's just
Okay.
like that space, just like being at the coast, there's nothing like it. And for some reason, I've always felt like the Pacific coast has called
Is
me,
the one.
is the one. Yeah. And, I just went there, and that's just where,
Yeah.
from one Pacific coastal city town to PV. But I love that about it. I just love the whole environment, and I guess what I don't like is, probably same as everybody, but the heat. I never can get used to it. I dread it every year. And I feel like at the beginning I start to kind of, it seems manageable, and you always lie to yourself a little bit. You're like,
You think you're going to do it, and then you can't.
exactly. So, and I will take it in a heartbeat over the cold, harsh winters of, the Northeast that I remember from as a distant, repressed memory from childhood. But, I knew winter was not for me as well. That's, I'll take it over that.
So, what's the one thing that new investors should know going into a first time investment in Mexico?
I would say, one extremely important thing is to look at the whole process and the big picture from beginning to end.
Yes.
And that includes, the specific logistics of, how the property purchase process works, the actual transaction process, what kind of, documentation is needed, and, all those kinds of, logistics and details. How the financing and making sure that, there's no real surprise costs, definitely overestimate, as as you want to always do,
Yeah.
like
Okay.
project a little bit higher so that you're not like, inundated with unforeseen expenses, right? But also, how long is everything going to take? They just say that expectations are the difference between, or like the, happiness. What is it? There's a formula. It's like happiness equals the difference between expectations and reality. So the closer they are together, the more likely you are to be happy. So it's like really just, trying to do the research you need to do, ask the questions you need to ask, and really know the timeline and the process from beginning to end before you dive in, so that you're fully aware of it. And I think this is something that you had also mentioned before. But when I talk about like the big picture and the full process from beginning to end, also the process of owning the property, the process of your direct role and involvement, the process of who you're working with on it directly, and the people you have to be interacting with on a daily basis, and how the whole overall experience is going to be for you as an investor, not just in the transaction, but in the ownership of the
And then the
property.
time frame that follows of ownership and maintenance long term, the responsibility for guest experience or whatever is involved in the future timeline that follows the actual transaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then also, but like knowing all of that so you can set good expectations, but also being flexible and open-minded, and really understanding that there are probably, if you're an international investor, there are likely going to be some, cultural expectations that are not necessarily what you do, that are not necessarily aligned with what your personal experiences being from a different culture. So, really being able to be flexible and open-minded about that. And it's just a lot of times in the way that people communicate. One of the things, actually, this might be another least favorite thing for me about Mexico, but like why everything has to be so last minute, and you're like, okay, I'm just sitting here for like a week, 3 weeks, waiting for someone to give me notice for something.
nothing.
That's how it is. And you figure out how you're going to, get a laugh out of it, enjoy it, and be flexible. Yeah.
Yeah. So as people, need to understand this, in any international market where you plan to invest and put down roots, you're dealing with another country. It's a different currency, and you're navigating a completely other culture.
Yeah.
So you have those three, key influences that are impacting the not only the transaction, but your experience, your calm, your preparedness, and your long term results over the term of the transaction.
Absolutely. And transactions, I mean, they do get emotional because everybody, and there's a lot of money, involved. And when there's a lot of money involved, people
Yeah.
get, tensions are high, energy is high, and so there are a lot of times, it's just about kind of, trusting the
Mhm.
process and surrounding yourself with people that you trust also to help
Yeah.
guide you through it.
A great team, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, long term, you're going to be doing business with the partners that you choose, from your agency to your notary and closing company to your bank to your property management to all the teams.
Exactly. All the
Exactly.
teams, like, you have to actually like them.
Yeah.
You have to enjoy interacting with them. And you don't say, I just found somebody to do this thing, because they do it. And, like, make sure that it's compatible, that it's
Yeah.
a good match.
And that is great advice for anyone who's making a move to Mexico, relocating a family, or establishing new roots for a new residence, whether it's income property or it's a personal residence.
Yeah.
And certainly anyone who's an investor, brand new or even seasoned, this is really great advice for anyone who's about to kick off a transaction like that.
Oh, good.
So
Yeah.
thank you so much. This has been so helpful. And you're just a wealth of knowledge. I know that we will do more episodes like this and really dig into these, this method that you have for calculating good investment, buy it, list it, or leave it.
I'm really excited to nerd out with you, Deb, more on investing stuff. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you're thinking about new construction, or a legacy retail property reinvestment this year, it's on your vision boards, it's on your plan for this year. Follow along, follow Dyanimite Investment Realty at all the links that we provide below. And if you like this content and these kinds of conversations, please like and follow. And thanks for following my passion project. This is just one of the many ways that we keep Vallarta real, with stories about investments, architecture, art, and design.